what we're doing here today is actually also a big risk. We are just decided to start it, and we want to see how it goes. Maybe you have to cut this, Vera. I'm not sure. Hello, welcome to the first ever episode of The Middle Ground. My name is Victoria Muradian. I am one of the co-hosts and co-producers of the new show that we are presenting to you today. My partner in crime, co-producer and co-host Valeria Ijic, is right now behind the camera. We are very excited to host on the Blue Couch our first ever guest. Our guest today is Julius Fintelmann. Julius is a journalist, media entrepreneur who has co-founded the European Correspondent, a bold pan-European media outlet that is already ruffling some feathers in Brussels. But Julius wasn't always meant to be a journalist or an editor. A decade ago, he was singing in a boys' choir on a path to become an opera singer. Today, we're going to share with you one of the most inspiring and audacious stories I've ever had the pleasure to share. Let's get into it. Julius, welcome, and thank you very, very much for being our first ever guest. That's an honor.
It's a huge honor, and pleasure is all mine.
I mentioned in the intro that you are a young media entrepreneur, and it's been 3 years that you have co-founded with two other people the European Correspondent. How does a 20-year-old guy just wake up one day and tell to himself, you know what, screw that. I'm going to set up a media outlet with no money, no resources, and somehow make 150 people follow your lead and work with you on a voluntary basis for the past few years?
Yeah, it's not just me. There's two other co-founders, Carla and Philip, who I want to give credit here for building the European Correspondent with me together. It's only possible because we work together that this can exist this way. And the reason behind founding and starting the European Correspondent was also a personal one, in that we felt we want a platform where we can read about European journalism, or we can read about what's going on in other places on the continent ourselves. And we felt that the platforms that there are out there, they don't suffice. There's not enough platforms that actually tell us really the stories that matter to Europeans across the continent. And we wanted and took the bold step to actually start one ourselves. And very quickly, people followed that vision and believed in that vision, that we as Europe, to actually master the challenges that we have, we need to come together. And to do that, we first need to know about what's going on across the continent. And many people joined in on that. It's been in total over the last 2.5 years, 340 volunteers that have worked with us. And now that we've professionalized, it's been only possible throughout this, with this passion and motivation from from literally hundreds of Europeans, that something like this can work. And I think that has carried the European Correspondent to where we are now. And I mean, my personal story, I'm sure we'll get into that more, but my personal story, of course, being born in sort of a multicultural or multi-country family, living in different places, has very much contributed to that. I've always understood myself as someone who belongs more to Europe rather than just one country. I mean, I have my family comes from several places, and it's very much in my identity to feel like I belong to Europe rather than just one place. And I think that's driven the European Correspondent.
It's an amazing to hear and also brings a lot of memories. So when we started working together a few years ago, but I cannot help but think that all odds were against you and the
Yeah.
team, because there are a lot of research saying that 90% of startups actually fail or eventually fail, and half of European startups fail in the first 3 years of their operation. So I'm sure you have done a lot of mistakes on the way. And what were the main mistakes that you have encountered or kept on repeating, and how did it humble you in the process of actually getting to where you are right now?
Yeah, you're right in saying that all odds were against us. I mean, starting a media company in this day and age, a media organization in a time when media is struggling, when media industry is in crisis, and starting one when startups usually fail, and then doing that on a European scale that has not really been done on such a grassroots level before. Of course, this was something relatively new. We were pioneering in that. We didn't have many idols to look up to that actually made it. There were, of course, we built up on a lot of success from others and a lot of experience from others and also failures from others. But if you ask about what humbled us, I think it's exactly that, realizing that, hey, we are in such a new position that we need to keep experimenting. We need to keep trying out things. And I think when we started with a much more fixed idea. This is the kind of stuff that we want to do. And then half year in, we realized, oh, actually, we need to shift our journalism. We need to focus more on what's actually interesting. It's maybe not the breaking news, but it's more what actually moves Europeans. It's actually what is impactful for Europeans across borders. And that realization that, hey, we started somewhere and actually we did a few 180s along the way. All the predictions, I mean, many of the financial predictions, for example, that we made turned out to be, didn't work out in the end. They turned out to be premature, and but I think that's a normal part of growing an organization, and especially when you're doing it for the first time, as we are. So it's even more amazing to see that it can last this long and can go so far. And I mean, we're just getting started, right? I think that's maybe also a very hopeful message here. Is even though all these odds are against us, there were over there were hundreds of people that were willing to put their time into a project like this. There were readers willing to put their time into reading it. I mean, any reader is giving you time, and that's who has time nowadays. It's a huge honor that people actually read you and give you feedback and tell you what you should do better or give you money. And it's only been possible because of this from our team, from our network, but also from our readers that we can that we survive and that we could go this far and will hopefully go much, much further.
Hmm. This year, you actually had your big break. You managed to secure funding from the European Commission, around 2 million euros, which will allow you to keep a newsroom open and hire a lot of people and eventually pay them. But there's a lot of discussion around receiving public funding. Does it feel like you're being empowered by the European project and
Mm.
institutions, or more watched and kept an eye on?
Yeah, so we accepted this funding that you mentioned, and we accepted it with the condition that our editorial independence is guaranteed. And throughout us now having this kind of money, and throughout us, building the newsroom and being able to professionalize, that's always been the sort of the baseline. Is we will not be interfered with when it comes to our editorial independence. Um, and that's also what we've been getting from the institutions, from the commission that has given us this money, is that very much what they care about is that the reports are in order, is that we're transparent, but we can do the journalism we want. There's no interference there. And I'm very glad. I mean, I'm the first one to criticize the institutions and the commission especially, but of course, that they took this step and enabled us to now grow is a huge win, I think, for us and for European journalism.
Absolutely. And European journalism is not doing super well at the moment with all the challenges and also demonization of the work of the journalists doing. And one big aspect of that is actually the mental health of journalists. You have been doing it, and I was doing it before with you for the past 2 years. And let's be honest, it's not always easy. First of all, there's a lot of, 60% of journalists always complain about the fact that they cannot financially sustain themselves, that they have to look for other jobs. Significant amount of time there was a lot of influx from journalism to other private sector, other professions like communication and public relations. What are the implications on your mental health to go through that, to lead such a big team for 2.5 years, and to have the responsibility of securing something for them,
Mm.
and also at the same time cover one of the most horrific conflicts and the war that we have been witnessing on the continent?
Yeah, I mean, you rightfully say that mental health in journalists is very bad. Many journalists are not doing great in their profession, and their newsrooms are not helping them. I think oftentimes, sadly, on the contrary, that newsrooms are built have toxic structures and leadership figures, and just in general how they're built, focusing on specific journalists that are star journalists. that then make life for their colleagues hell. So it's a media problem, and I think we need to look internally for that. Of course, the world is to blame. I mean, the world's terrible, and we're watching the news like no one else is. We're watching what's happening in the world like no one else is. So with that in mind, and then going into newsrooms and into sometimes toxic newsrooms, it's, I think, our, as media, our responsibility to build support systems within newsrooms that enable that.
Mhm.
And for us, I mean, we've now been for for the past 2.5 years, for the first 2.5 years of us publishing, we ran with volunteers. We worked with people that put their time for free into the European Correspondent because they believed in the idea.
Mhm.
And there, much more, you realize, hey, you have to take care of your people. You have to take care that your people get rest, that you send your people on holiday when they need them, that you do not, because the only thing that you run on is their passion, and you
Mhm.
don't want them to burn out because of that. And I think us having learned that in the last 2.5 years of how to do that with volunteers, I hope that we'll be able to transport that into the new structures, and that's the ambition.
And I'm looking forward to see where you go next. I want to go back to your classical music career. You were in Basel Boys Choir, I think, a decade ago or so, if
Yeah,
I'm not mistaken, and you were on the path to become an opera
yeah.
singer. If 10-year-old Julius saw where you are now, what would he think? What would he say?
Yeah, I was on the path to become an opera singer for a good part of my life until I turned, I think, 16, 17. That's when I realized that I want to do something else, that I want to do something that has more impact rather than just doing opera. But if you ask what would 10-year-old me tell me now, I think 10-year-old me wasn't so sure about opera yet. That came later. When I was 10, I was still very much doing it for sort of just the fun.
Mhm.
And I was, played the piano and had singing lessons and all the good stuff. And I think it shaped me in a way, and also being on stage later in theater shapes you in a way that is such a valuable school for life.
Mhm.
It teaches you how to speak. It teaches you how to be in the moment. It teaches you how to be present, and that is something that I've taken from that.
Mhm.
Yeah, but it's something that I look back on, of course, very fondly, and I had such a great time, and I don't think I'd be the same that I am now without that past.
And are there any skills that you feel like you have taken from the opera world, from the classical music world, and kind of transferred into what you're doing now in journalism?
Mm. I don't consider myself a natural extrovert, for example. I think when I was a child, I was
Mhm.
a lot more introverted. And I think through doing theater, through doing opera, through being exposed, I learned to be extroverted much more. And I think that's very useful in whatever profession you're in, but especially in journalism when you have to meet people, when you constantly have to mingle. I mean, half my job is going around the continent and meeting people.
Okay, besides opera, you have another very interesting passion, which I want to explore. I have crowned you the honorary Eastern European because I was always surprised in the past years working with you how much of an understanding and compassion you have toward people in my part of the world because I'm from Armenia. It is technically Eastern Europe, even though it depends on how you define it. But towards the traditions, towards the way of thinking, also empathy towards the struggle that people are going through. What is it about that region that you, as a Swiss, German, Dutch, Gen Z, managed to find some connection to?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for the compliment. I think it's the biggest compliment that anyone's given me to crown me an honorary Eastern European. I appreciate that. I mean, I think the region. First, I have personal connections to there. My stepmother is from Ukraine and has taught me a lot about the struggle in Ukraine, in Eastern Europe at large, has politicized me to a large extent on these questions. And it's, I think, really because of her and because of her thinking that I got to know the region well, and I got to know Ukraine somewhat well. I've also traveled to Ukraine, to several places in Eastern Europe, and I love being there. I think the warmth that you get there is unlike anything you get in Western Europe. And on a more meta level, this is where Europe is decided. This is where Europe is fought for. If we look at Georgia, that's maybe one of the few places where people are still waving European flags and protests, and where that's still very much the ambition. And if what's Europe if not what's being defended there, what's being fought for there? The same in Ukraine. The Ukrainian army is protecting us and is fighting for Europe and for the European idea. and that's a reality that I think I've come to realize early on, that if you look at, okay, Europe, what is Europe? Let's look at where people are actually fighting for it and dying for it.
Okay, before we move to your life in Brussels, as you have recently moved in here, I want to talk about another very interesting story that I'm sure is going to be very interesting for most of our listeners. Is your time in Turkey. You have decided to move there last year, and you were very excited about living in Istanbul and working on the correspondent there. However, a few months after living there, you were kicked out of the country.
Yes.
I want to know, how does it feel like to piss off a government so much that they are labeling you a national security threat and asking you to leave?
I mean, when a government such as the government of the Republic of Turkey labels you a threat to national security, I see it as a badge of honor. I It sounds like I'm doing something right. Do I know why? Well, they've not told me. Will I know? Probably not. And
How did you receive the news? Like, did they call you? Did the police came? Did you receive an email?
I received an email.
You
So the way that you get told that you're a threat to national security is via email. So I had applied for a visa, several, and they all got rejected. The first one got rejected, and that's when I was labeled. And then I had left the country for a few months, came back after, and tried again. And they said, "Well, with this label, you're not allowed to stay." And that's when I was forced to leave and to move to Brussels, which, it's good for us. I think being here in Brussels, I am very much enjoying the city. It's now been half a year of me being here, and I think it's still a great place to be. It doesn't deserve the reputation that it has. But of course, it is for me still a badge of honor to be labeled that. I hope that other countries will follow suit.
Well, I hope not, because I hope that you will have a chance to travel around and cover a lot more stories than we're doing right now.
Yeah.
Because I think particularly stories from Turkey are very important. We have had great journalists, the correspondent, who are telling stories, but you are particularly your story on cats in Istanbul actually went viral. I remember. And the life there, and I remember the stories that you were telling about how warm people were. Unfortunately, very often I think there is a clash between the what the city represents and also what the policies are imposed on
Yeah.
people who live there.
Absolutely. I want to stress as well, what happened to me is in no way comparable to what's happening to journalists there. Dozens of journalists are imprisoned in Turkey, some for months, for years. And because they're Turkish, they can do that. I'm not Turkish. They tend to be more careful with foreign journalists, and I was never detained or anything like that. So I want to make that very clear that, my case is a funny first date story, but it's not something where I was physically harmed or endangered. And
Mhm.
there's many journalists there that are actually in danger and whose physical integrity is harmed by the state.
Mhm.
And we need to protect them much more. We need to talk about them much more, not just in Turkey, in all of the autocracies that we have in Europe. There's journalists that are facing persecution for just doing their work.
It's very important that you have mentioned about what's happening to journalists across the world, because the way the journalism is happening in Brussels and a lot of big capitals around Europe is it's actually quite a closed off circle of few people who have been there for a long time, and I feel that sometimes that circle is not very open to up and coming journalists. Do you think that there is elitism in journalism, particularly in Western Europe? And because you traveled so much around and you saw journalism in the Balkans, in the Caucasus, in Eastern Europe, in Southern Europe, what do you think you were trying to fix when setting up with Philip and Carla, your two other co-founders, the European Correspondent, or you were trying to piss someone really, really badly off?
So the first question about journalists being in trouble everywhere. I think yeah, it's a very worrying trend, and Israel has been very successful at killing journalists in Gaza. Turkey, Russia have been very successful at imprisoning them, and the track records and the playbook that these countries use follow each other and are often the same. Now, for us, when we do journalism, we have work with local correspondents in every European country, right? So we have someone that covers Portugal, we have someone that covers Armenia, and most of the times they are in those countries. In certain countries, that's not possible. We have exiled Russian correspondents. We had exiled Azerbaijani correspondents. Hopefully, we'll get them again because it's not possible to do journalism there. And we see that through working with local correspondents, we have a very clear insight in how struggling the industries there are and how the challenges that they have compared to us journalists here in Western Europe are just not comparable. I mean, if you on a daily basis face persecution for tweeting, it's something else than, I don't know, facing a shitstorm on the internet in Western Europe. And yeah, so I do think that kind of difference exists, and we need to acknowledge it. And when you ask about elitism, that is an issue. I think, I mean, just look at the newsrooms, how white they are, how male dominated they are. I mean, I want to speak, but it is a true challenge to diversify newsrooms, but we have to, because only if we have voices represented from that actually represent society, our stories get better. We just benefit from it. That goes for gender, that goes for age, that goes for color of skin, that especially goes for social economic backgrounds, where journalism, because it is so precariously paid, is still very much an industry that thrives by having people that can afford to can fall back on family, can fall back on other support systems. And people that are already struggling and coming from poorer backgrounds, they are less likely to make it into the industry, which is a true pity because we miss a lot of stories.
No, absolutely. And the diversity of the newsrooms has a direct impact on the
Yeah,
diversity of the stories
exactly.
we're seeing in media. Luckily, now you are in Brussels, which is very, very exciting. I'm sure you're going to make some waves here. But first, because we want to make it a tradition for our guests to come to the show with an object that they cannot live without in Brussels. What did you bring with you today?
So this is a bit silly. I apologize. I will address the viewers directly. I brought a beer. It's not sponsored. I was explicitly told to say that this is not sponsored. Jupiler, if you're watching this, get in touch. But yeah, I think one thing that people don't tell you about Brussels, or that people are scared to admit, is how much you drink in this city. It's remarkable. At every networking event, at every dinner, there's always alcohol involved. And yeah, that's why I brought a beer. We do not promote alcoholism here on the show.
So you've been here only for a few months for now. How do you like?
I really like Brussels. I mean, I've moved here in April, and now it's been around half a year, and I'm thoroughly enjoying my time in the city. I think it's a great place to be. There's people, so many interesting people to meet. It's so mixed and international. You run into people everywhere, and it's so easy to just make friends and make new connections. I think that's what makes the city and make it feel like a very good place to live for me. Um, do I think there are cities that are otherwise more interesting around the continent? Yeah. But I still think
I would
Brussels.
disagree.
I still think Brussels is a good place to be. I'm enjoying it.
And you have been away from your family for a few years already, for a long time. I have there are like two aspects of that being an expat in Brussels. The first is you very often feel like everything around is burning. You are at the center of European policy making. A lot of things are happening here. You hear basically your life is becoming part of the news, and you're also an editor. What or who do you rely on when you're feeling that everything around is just falling apart? And where is your safe haven?
Yeah. I like is that both my apartments and our office are not near the EU, the European quarter. They're outside in the city, but not right next to the Commission. So you get some kind of balance by not being there all the time, and by being in neighborhoods where actually the EU feels very far away. I live in Ixelles. Our office is in Marolles. It's a place where you are. The Commission is 15 minutes, 20 minutes away, and that's a very good balance, just to be around some normal people and not always be around people that are in the bubble.
Is there something that you feel like Brussels is still doing better than a lot of other European capitals or cities?
Yeah, so I think this might be controversial, but I do think that Brussels is better at doing public transport. I am thoroughly enjoying public transport here. I think you get everywhere very quickly. It's quite reliable, unless there's strikes. But let's leave that out for now. And I also like, and this may also be controversial, but I like the way that this city handles having so many different cultures. In other cities where I've lived, it's very much this district is mainly this ethnicity, and it's very sort of how do you say, pillarized. And here it feels much more mixed. You have districts in Ixelles where, one street is Belgian, then the other street feels much more, I don't know, Congolese, the other feels much more Moroccan. And that's great. It's a great mix, and it really makes the city much more alive. And if you walk through the city, you feel like you're walking through 10 different cities. But somehow it still becomes coherent. So I think those two things Brussels is better at than the rest of Europe.
You also yourself grew up in a very multicultural family, and do you feel like this hunger to create something, to build something, almost like an obsession, I would say sometimes, comes from your childhood? If you look back at how you were
Yeah.
raised.
Yeah. I mean, I think having the ambition to do something in life,
Mm.
having a drive to do something in life, that for me comes from my parents, without whom I would not have managed this, without whom I would not be here, I would not be doing what I'm doing. First, they themselves are doing things in their lives that is very impressive, and have taught me a lot. And I think what they've given me is a lot of cultural capital versus financial capital. I wouldn't say that we didn't have that much of that, but we had a lot of cultural capital. So understanding how the world works, understanding politics, understanding culture, and really also being interested in that enriches your life so much, and also makes you much more receptive for what's out there. And I think I have to thank them for that, and for sort of all the huge support that they've given to make this possible, this life that I can live.
How do you explain to your family, your grandparents, what you're doing?
My mom is, I think, the phenotype of a news consumer. She's
Mm.
subscribed to, I don't know, 6 different newspapers. She reads them every day and is a huge fan. My dad is very similar. So they get it. And that helps. And they give me feedback, and they tell me that's not a good article. That's a good article. You should do that, and you should do that. And that's quite good to have.
Okay, Julius, are you ready to play the first game of our first ever show? Rapid
Absolutely.
fire question.
Absolutely. Bring it
Okay,
on.
so I'm going to give you a few questions.
Yeah.
I want you to say what's on your mind, the
Yeah.
very first thing.
Yeah.
First question: what's your power move during Brussels networking events?
My power move during Brussels networking events is go in, talk to as many people as possible, don't get stuck too long, and leave after like an hour.
Amazing strategy. Favorite composer?
My favorite composer, Gustav Mahler.
What's the non-EU place you go to feel like you have escaped the bubble?
The place where I go to in Brussels that is not the bubble, I think it's our office in Mara.
Favorite coffee shop?
I don't know.
We should start exploring.
We should start exploring. Absolutely. Take me to more.
What commissioner would you like to be stuck in a lift with?
Oi. I don't think I would like to be stuck in a lift with any commissioner.
When your family and friends visit, what is one place you take them to show that Brussels is very cool?
I think is Bois de la Combe. It's nature, there's forest, rare in Belgium.
Which of the Brussels journalists you would like to be your mentor?
Oh, I think I would like, for the Brussels-based journalists, I would like James Cantor to be my mentor.
The objective of our show, which is called The Middle Ground, is to help find a very fulfilling middle point of the life in Brussels between very successful and aspiring careers and also a good and healthy personal life with a lot of authenticity and connection beyond what's happening in the EU bubble. So, Julius, as a first guest, I have to ask you, how do you find or how did you find your middle ground in Brussels?
I don't really think there is a middle ground. Everything you do is about intensity and doing it to the fullest. That goes for professional, but that also goes for personal life. Go all in.
Go all in. This is the advice we're getting from our first guest, and I have to say, I absolutely agree with that. And to finish up the show today, we want to ask all our guests to prepare a question for the next guest without knowing who they might be. So, what would be your question and message to the second speaker?
I had to think about this for a long time. I think my question for the next speaker, and for any speaker, because I'm still wrapping my head around it, is how can we fix the European Union? how can we make it better? How can we make it represent citizens more? How can we make it be more actually working and communicating to the outside world? I'd love to get as many perspectives on that as possible.
I'm hoping that our second guest will have a very good answer to that question.
I hope so too.
Thank you very, very much for joining us, Julius, for the first episode for The Middle Ground. I hope that your passion for journalism and for the European project will spill through the screens to our viewers and to the listeners of the podcast, and that it will also inspire a lot of people to answer those questions for themselves. I wish you and the correspondent the best of luck, and looking forward to see what you're doing next.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh my God,
Let's take a picture, huh?